All right, it's 2:45, so I'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our presentation with Moana Lamaumbaya. It's Elevating Indigenous Scholarship through Indigenous OER on the Indigenous Knowledge's Digital Learning Library. But without further ado, take it away, Moana.
Thank you. Let me share my PowerPoint here. Okay. Good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moana Lamaumbaya. I am the Assistant Archivist for Indigenous Initiatives and Cultures here at Cline Library, Northern Arizona University. I am Hopi from the village of Hopewell on the third mesa of the Hopi Reservation. And I'm very excited to be here with you all today to present this project that myself and my colleagues John Doherty and Peter Runge are working on with a whole team here at Cline Library. And so my presentation today will be Elevating Indigenous Scholarship through Indigenous OER, the Indigenous Knowledge's Digital Learning Library, or the IKDLL. Sorry, let me just close this so I can see the whole thing. So the Indigenous Knowledge's Digital Learning Library, it's a publicly accessible online repository that provides access to Indigenous open educational resources. Our repository is available for access inside the university for people that are affiliated with the university, but people who are not affiliated with the university. So that includes local, regional, and hopefully national and global access. It's used as an educational resource to contribute materials to and to take materials from. It's an ever-growing educational resource. It provides respectful and culturally appropriate access to Indigenous knowledges, cultures, histories, perspectives, and innovations. And the purpose of this repository is learning, understanding, and teaching about Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous ways of knowing, learning, knowledge, culture, all the aspects of Indigenous communities and cultures in a respectful and culturally appropriate way. The IKDLL centers and elevates Indigenous perspectives and voices, and it's funded by a grant here that we were lucky to be awarded called the 7 Generations Signature Initiative. The 7 Generation Signature Initiative. So a little bit of background on our grant and the way that we are able to operate on campus and operate within the library. The reason that I am here actually, in 2022, NAU was awarded this transformational grant by the Mellon Foundation, which was then matched by the NAU Foundation. It's a grant to implement this initiative over the course of 3 years, and I believe we are in our 3rd year now. It's inspired by NAU's commitment to Indigenous peoples. For those, I'm sure everybody's familiar, but NAU is located in Flagstaff, which is a border town to many reservations and Indigenous communities in this area. And so we have a commitment to Indigenous peoples, commitment to our Indigenous students to become partners, collaborate with, and support our Indigenous communities, our Indigenous neighbors, and our students who attend here at NAU. The 7 Generation Signature Initiative is composed of 3 portfolios. The first is Elevating Indigenous Scholarship, the second is Strengthening Partnerships, and the third is Propelling Indigenous Student Success. So that third tier, that third portfolio, materializes in the form of an Indigenous Peoples Living Learning Community on campus. This is a part of the residential life here on campus, and it's structured as a dorm life community in 2 of our dorms here on campus. So Indigenous students can, and it's not required or anything, but Indigenous students can elect to live in this Indigenous people living learning community, kind of be with a community of other Indigenous students on campus and have that support of a community like that. Strengthening Partnerships is the 7 Gen Center, or 7 Generations Indigenous Knowledge Center on campus, who works with a variety of stakeholders and communities. The Indigenous Knowledge Holders is a group that they work with, which are a group of Indigenous knowledge holders and elders from different communities across the Southwest. And they also do a lot of programming for our students here on campus at the Center for Native American and Indigenous Futures across the street from Cline Library. And they work with tribal partners as well, and work with elders and other programming for Indigenous students, for everyone, but it's usually Indigenous programming here on campus. And that third piece is elevating Indigenous scholarship. And that's the piece that our program, our project falls under here at Cline Library. So Cline Library was tasked with creating this Indigenous Open Educational Resources Repository. The repository serves a multitude of functions. It first supports the new General Studies program at NAU that'll be rolling out in fall 2025. Under that new program, there is a new curriculum requirement called the Indigenous Peoples Inclusive Perspective requirement. And so classes that are registered under that curriculum requirement teach a component of Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous culture, Indigenous history, whatever it may be, as part of that course. And it's a course designation that is given to those courses that get approved under that curriculum requirement. And so that's really important. It's the first development of its kind here at NAU. And courses under that requirement in the General Studies program can be anything from engineering to environmental science to theater. All of those courses that are trying to attain that requirement go through a review to make sure that they are doing that in a meaningful and respectful way. And so we help them with that program. This tool is for the public, but also for our NAU community here, our students, our staff, our faculty, to serve as an educational tool for anyone who would like to use it. Our team on campus, so we work within the library. We have a great team here. Cynthia Childry is our Dean and University Librarian, and she offers a lot of our administrative support. John Doherty, who is here, he's one of the moderators on this conference. He is our OER expert in our group and helping us to navigate questions around IOER and OER and Creative Commons licensing and all of those different pieces. There's me, who is kind of leading the development of this repository. Kelly Phillips, who is our archivist for digital programs. She is her and Mike Taylor, who's our head of technology strategies and services in the library, have led the development of kind of the technological aspects of this repository, the technology, the metadata, the schema, all of that, the content management system, all of those things. And then Peter Runch, who is the head of special collections and archives. He is our kind of big picture person, and he offers a lot of support to me, to our whole team in terms of navigating questions we may come across, and just kind of all of the things we think about. He's a good sounding board and helps us organize and facilitate the navigation of all of the things that come with building an Indigenous Open Educational Resources Repository. And so our collaborators across campus, the Office of Native American and Indigenous Advancement, we're closely working with on looking at how we navigate creating a repository like this in a respectful and appropriate manner for when we're talking about Indigenous knowledge and working with Indigenous communities and the like. The others are the Seven Gems Center, the Indigenous knowledge holders who I briefly mentioned. We work closely with them. They help advise and mentor us on things that we ask for help with, documentation that we wish for them to review. They were a big help in creating our mission, vision, and collecting scope documents, and just kind of helping us to think about all the different technical or complex things that we may not always consider. Third is the Teaching and Learning Center and the Indigenous Peoples Course Initiative Faculty Learning Coordinators. We worked with them, we constantly work with them, and they're great advisors to us as well on this project. And then the General Studies program here on campus. So what is Indigenous OER? I know that we had Kayla Larson talking earlier about Indigenous OER and their development, and we really take from what they have achieved in terms of researching, creating, and founding and using Indigenous open educational resources, and take that and apply that within this project that we're building and this repository that we're creating. So Indigenous open educational resources interweave Indigenous knowledges with frameworks of Western open educational resources. OER are publicly accessible learning, research, and teaching materials, and it's based on this 5 R's of OER: reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, and retain. OER, I'm sure we all know this, but they're shared using open access models and Creative Commons licensing. But Indigenous OER interweaves OER frameworks with Indigenous knowledge frameworks, sovereignty, and ways of knowing and learning. So it takes a lot of what OER is, but it deconstructs, decolonizes, and restructures all of that from an Indigenous perspective and way of thinking. And I think one of the biggest pieces when we talk about Indigenous OER is this open access concept and how that applies in a different way to Indigenous OER, where we have limits and boundaries within which we operate for Indigenous OER to ensure that we are not providing access to culturally sensitive information, or we are doing things in an ethical way to where we don't fall into this long history of overexploitation of Indigenous communities and Indigenous knowledge and publishing that for self-benefit. And so all of this accumulated in this framework about ethical incorporation of Indigenous knowledges into OER, and that is the 6 R's of Indigenous open educational resources. I can't remember if I'm supposed to be checking the chat, but let's keep.
It's okay. I've been taking a look at it.
Okay, sorry, I forgot. So when we talk about the 6 R's of Indigenous OER, I'll just briefly go over that again because we did have that wonderful presentation. It was amazing from Kayla Larson. So respect for Indigenous cultural communities, identities, and topics, relationships, which connects to the concept of all of our relations and building relations with Indigenous communities. Responsibility to share only when we're allowed, when and what we're allowed, and publish in an ethical way. Reverence, which is that respect for the sacred, for sacred knowledge, for how knowledge can be categorical. It can be for a certain audience during a certain time of year, for a certain gender, and recognizing all of that and making sure that we're only sharing what we're allowed and we have respect for that sacred knowledge. Relevance, which is legitimizing and incorporating Indigenous knowledge into curriculum when it makes sense. For us, that means not just publishing something because you can or because you think it should be available for everybody to know or read or see or learn. Incorporating into curriculum when that makes sense, not just because we can do it. And then reciprocity, this giving and receiving with communities, which is so foundational to many Indigenous communities, including my own. Oh, sorry. And so when we talk about Indigenous OER versus traditional OER, one of the biggest differences is the difference between those foundational R's, right? So the 6 R's of Indigenous OERs versus the 5 R's of OER, really kind of the intentionality behind those 6 R's and how we think about going forward and working with Indigenous OER and working with our Indigenous communities and working with the Indigenous knowledge that we are given and that we are allowed to share. And so again, Indigenous OER deconstructs and decolonizes OER, rebuilds it using Indigenous teachings, Indigenous education. And it talks about, again, Indigenous communities holding knowledge as sacred, and it's earned. It's not something that you can just take or get on a whim or just by asking somebody. There's a lot of knowledge within Indigenous communities, again, including my own, that's earned. You earned it. You earn it throughout your life. You earn it at certain points in your life. By going through certain experiences, you learn things. And so that's really vital to this, is that it's earned and it's sacred. It's not just open access like we think of traditional OER. And then again, not all information should be available for public access. Indigenous communities, Indigenous peoples have that right to data sovereignty and to control their data and the right to ownership and really dictate to us what is allowed versus what isn't allowed in terms of sharing information. And all of that kind of is very different from the traditional OER, that publicly accessible learning. It should all be open, it should all be available, and it should all be free, right? Traditional OER is great and it serves a purpose, but when we look at Indigenous OER, the intentionality there is very different. And so when we were developing this project, we were trying to figure out how to build an Indigenous open educational resource repository for the university and the greater communities. There were certain things that I myself and others needed to hold true. And so these are those things. Providing access to Indigenous knowledges require recognition and careful consideration of possibly culturally sensitive knowledge. The IKDLL doesn't provide any access to any culturally sensitive or questionably sensitive materials or knowledge. We are creating and have kind of developed an extensive review process for materials submitted to the IKDLL that we hope, we haven't tried this yet, it's still in development stages, but will completely or hopefully completely eliminate any possibility of Indigenous knowledge, culturally sensitive knowledge, entering into the IKDLL. And then working with Indigenous open educational resources requires commitment to ensuring materials are safeguarded and made accessible based on consultation with Indigenous collaborators. So, and that's in combination with the Office of Native American and Indigenous Advancement, making sure that we only provide access to what we're allowed to provide access to and what feels right to provide access to. And lastly, that the 6 R's of Indigenous OER serve as a foundation for our repository here. And this statement, we hold tremendous responsibility as caretakers and custodians of a repository holding and making Indigenous knowledge accessible. This repository, building it, creating it, thinking about all the different intricate pieces to the repository, our mission, vision, collecting scope statements, our website, the content we share. We know that we hold that responsibility so strongly in our hearts, knowing that this is something that hasn't really been done before and that we are doing something that requires care and consideration and doing this correctly as best as we can. And so we will go on a brief journey here. This is the face of our temporary version for the Indigenous Knowledges Digital Learning Library. We also have a website that provides some background information to the project, to the library, to a glossary, all of those pieces to what is Indigenous OER. Before we go there, though, I wanted to say that this version of the IKDLL that we have up and live right now, it is a proof of concept temporary beta version. We are in development with EPrints right now to develop a more complex, robust version of the IKDLL that will be the permanent instance of the IKDLL. This is our temporary version that says, hey, this exists, this can happen, and this is how it can look. And so this is the version that we have for now. In the late spring, early summer, we hope to have the robust version up and ready for use by everyone. And so let's go to the website really quickly. So this is our website. This is really exciting. This is kind of a tangible piece of proof for me of this is actually happening, right? We've had this long project. I've been in my position for a little over a year, and I should say that this is a brand new position that is being funded by the grant at the moment, but I will transition to a permanent employee of the university and the library when that grant period ends. And this is my main mission, is to build this repository. And so building this website and seeing this as a proof that this thing exists was really exciting for me. And so this is our website. It's our NAU website that provides just some information. On every page in this website, and there's 5 pages, there is a button that says go to the IKDLL. And so the link is up here, and NAU, you all can see this, right? I hope. Anyway.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. You can go to this website and search through this. We won't go through the whole thing right now for time, but our land acknowledgement sits here for NAU. Information, there's an About tab, a Resources tab about Indigenous OER, our team and collaborators, and then a glossary. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But every page has our contact info and the IKDLL button. So we will go there. And so this is the repository as it sits right now. And it's really exciting. We have our sample group of content right now is 101 materials. We haven't begun the content submission process yet, but we are in the process of slowly rolling that out. So all of the content here right now has been curated and collected and put up here by myself. It's all OER materials. It's all under Creative Commons licensing. And so if we go, we have the last 20 editions here. If we go to this one, Genetic Research with Indigenous Peoples Perspectives on Governance and Oversight in the U.S. And this is just one example. So the Creative Commons license is up here, Creative Commons attribution. You have some information about the article, the authors, the abstract. And then when you go click on the thumbnail here, it'll just pull it up for you. It'll be in the same tab, but it'll pull it up for you. So you can definitely like go open new tab. But this is an example of what it looks like. So it's under open access. And this is to do with Indigenous governance and oversight in the United States. And that's one small example. And I won't do a whole lot more, but I'll show you one more. And so this is another article. So most of this is in the form of articles and textbooks at the moment. We have one video up in here right now that comes to us from programming done at the 7Gen Center here on campus. And we plan to have more material from them in the coming months. But this is one more example, Indigenous, a technical and decolonial analysis of activist uses of hashtags across social movements. So again, you have your license here, attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives. Click on it and you can download it. You can look at it here in the repository itself, or you can download this. And for our faculty members here on campus especially, but anywhere, you can download this and you can use these in your classes if you wish, because they're all under open access licensing. And so going back, so this is it. This is our temporary beta version of the repository. Everything in here has to do with Indigenous knowledge in some way, shape, or form. We have a variety of materials and topics in this repository. We have history, we have tribal wildlife management, Indigenous filmmaking. It's kind of across the board. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay. And so that link, the website is ikdll.nau.edu. And so when we talk about content for the IKDLL, the materials can range from library and your traditional format materials like moving images, audio recordings, photographs, etc., to educational and other materials. Further on down the line, we may include representations of cultural or three-dimensional materials, but digital format is the way that we would provide access to those. 101 pieces of content. Again, articles and textbooks. Our forthcoming content is going to come from presentations that have been done at the Center for Native American and Indigenous Futures here on the NAU campus. And so materials, we can include anything and everything. If someone has an article they want to give us, we can accept that. It'll go through a review process to ensure there's no culturally sensitive information. We can accept oral histories, storytelling. There's poetry in this repository right now. Everything just has to be under Creative Commons licensing. And so you as the contributor have to own the copyright or have a Creative Commons license, or if you don't have a license and you own the copyright, we can help you navigate the Creative Commons licensing process. And our initial focus will be on gathering content from NAU faculty and NAU community members. And so our last, I believe this is the last piece. the IKDLL glossary. And so I will go back to the web page really quickly. So this is our glossary. The glossary is a living document that provides definitions of terms that are used throughout the Indigenous Knowledge's digital learning library. And it includes those kind of jargony academic terms that we use largely in a library and archival setting. As the repository grows, this glossary will grow, and anybody can request to add a word to it words to it at any point in time. And so, for example, our first word here is archives, and there's like 10 different definitions for archives. But the goal of this glossary is to eliminate obstacles around specialized and alienating language. Again, we want this repository to be a tool for anyone to use, whether you work at the university, whether you go to the university, whether you go to a university, or whether you're a community member. There can be, especially when we talk about, from my own experience, working with members of our Indigenous communities and people from my own community, language and vocabulary and jargon can be very ostracizing. And so our goal here is to deconstruct and make that academic and archival language accessible across communities, so that you're not hindered in using this, or somebody doesn't want to use this because they don't understand the language being used in it in the ways that we are presenting this repository. So again, here's an example, but I showed you the repository as it exists on the website. And so our next steps, we're currently developing this content submission process. We'll begin gathering content from our NAU contributors in the near future. Our website was in development, but now it's live now and kind of making edits and tweaks to it as we need to. We hope to create a logo somewhere down the line for the IKDLL. And then just our next step is to spread the word about the IKDLL and hopefully have more people begin using it and begin contributing material, but that'll also be part of our transition to the permanent IKDLL. Will be a bigger launch and more conversation around it once we have that permanent version of the content management system up and ready to go. And that's it.
Wow, thank you so much. We still have about 3 minutes left, and I'm wondering if there are any questions. There were a few comments in the chat, but they were mostly just positive comments about the work that you've done, which is not surprising to me. I actually did have a question if no one else does, and I think you had mentioned that no resource like this really exists. And if that's true, I guess this is a comment, not a question then, but if that's true, then everyone involved in this, I think, should be very proud of the work that you've done, because it's really inspiring and it's such an innovation. So I'm really excited about it. And I think that it's definitely a contribution, considering that it's the first of its kind. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And that's insofar as we've been able to look online anywhere for something like this that could exist. It's interesting to think, because prior to starting my position here, I have a background in archaeology and, of course, working with Indigenous communities from that aspect, working on repatriation, on NAGPRA, things like that. And so it was a quick learn when I started working here a little over a year ago in what is OER, what is Indigenous OER, because I haven't been out of school that long, but it wasn't a huge thing when I was in school. And so learning what an OER was, learning about Creative Commons licensing and learning about Indigenous OER, it was all really fascinating, but there's not a whole lot that's been done on that front, as far as I can tell, here in the United States quite yet. A lot of what I was finding in terms of information on it and research being done in it, and even Indigenous OER being created was kind of in Canada and Australia at this point. And so that was really interesting to think about and learn. And so if you know of any other repositories that exist like this, please, I'd love to know, because I don't want to say we're the only one if somewhere else exists as well.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Well, I guess that brings us to time. So Moana, thank you again so much. It was a wonderful presentation. And I guess have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for your time, everyone.
All right, bye.